The scream of tearing fabric split the quiet of my kitchen before I even registered what I was hearing. Gift wrap, metallic and sharp. Ripping as I unwrapped the box Daniel left on the counter with a note that read, "Sorry, I'll be late again." Then the boom of my phone notification, loud in the silence, made me flinch. The screen lit up. A video message from an unknown number. My thumb hovered, then tapped. It auto-played. Brooke's laughter filled my kitchen, bright and familiar. The kind I'd heard 1,000 times over coffee and shared secrets. Then Daniel's voice, low and intimate, murmuring something I couldn't quite hear. The camera angle was dim, shadowy, but I recognized his office, the leather chair, the lamp with the brass base. Their bodies were too close, her hand on his chest, his fingers tangled in her hair. My hands went numb. The wine glass I'd been holding slipped, shattering against the tile in an explosion of red and glass. I staggered backward, breath caught somewhere between my lungs and throat, and fumbled for the counter. The video kept playing, her lips on his neck, his hands pulling her closer. I couldn't watch, couldn't stop watching. Then I was moving, shoving through the back door into the wind. Cold ocean air slapped my face, tore at my white blouse, whipped my hair into my eyes. I kicked off my shoes, left them scattered on the deck, and stumbled down toward the edge of the property where the bay churned below, storm tide rolling in dark and furious. The wind howled. Salt spray stung my cheeks. I wasn't sure if I was crying or if it was just the sea. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Another text, another lie. I couldn't breathe. Headlights streaked past on Shoreline Drive, blurred through my vision. I ran to my car, barefoot, blouse flapping like a torn sail, and slammed the door shut. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. I didn't have a destination. I just drove. Wipers thrashed against the windshield, beating in rhythm with my heart, a snare drum pounding too fast, too loud. The road curved along the coast. Black water on one side, empty night on the other. I parked hard by the marina, tires skidding on wet gravel. Cold spray slapped my face as I stumbled out. My feet hit the dock, bare skin against splintered wood, and I didn't care. I pulled up Brooke's number and called. It rang once, twice, then voicemail. Her voice, chipper and false. I hung up and dialed Daniel. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, babe, can't talk right now. Board call running late." His voice was smooth, practiced, the same voice he used when he lied about working weekends or late meetings or business trips that smelled like someone else's perfume. I tasted salt. I wasn't sure if it was the sea or the tears streaming down my throat. "Right," I whispered. "Board call." I hung up before he could say anything else. My phone rang immediately. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost threw the whole thing into the bay. But something made me answer. "Naomi Hale?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Yes. My name is Miriam Cole. I'm the executor of your grandmother's estate. I apologize for the late hour, but there's a clause in her will that triggers tonight, and I'm required to inform you immediately." I blinked, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "A clause?" "Your grandmother left you an inheritance of $90,000. However, there is a condition. You must tell no one about this inheritance for 30 days. Not your spouse, not your friends, not anyone. If you breach this condition at any point during that period, the funds revert to charity. Do you understand?" $90,000. Tell no one. 30 days. I laughed. It came out sharp and broken, echoing across the empty marina. The cosmic joke of it all. The universe dropping a lifeline the exact moment I was drowning. "Yes," I said, voice cracking. "I understand. The funds will be wired to the account on file by morning. I'll send the full documentation via encrypted email within the hour. Again, I'm sorry for your loss, and for the unusual timing." She hung up. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to dead air and the crash of waves against the dock. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from Brooke. "Don't call tonight. I'll explain." Hurt flooded through me, hot and vicious, then crystallized into something colder. Fury, clarity. I almost speed-dialed Daniel right then. Almost screamed everything into the phone. The affair, the lies, the inheritance. But Miriam's voice echoed in my head. Tell no one. 4 syllables. A life raft in the middle of a storm. I pocketed my phone and walked back to my car. My bare feet left wet prints on the gravel. My white blouse clung to my skin, soaked through from spray and rain. I caught my reflection in the car window, a stranger with wild hair and hollow eyes, and something inside me shifted, woke up. At 2:17 in the morning, I sat in the 24-hour cafe near the harbor, my laptop open on the table, a cup of cold coffee untouched beside me. I opened a new bank account under my maiden name, Cruz, through an online portal, transferred the routing information to Miriam, scheduled an automatic rent payment from my old account so Daniel wouldn't notice anything missing. Then I pulled my credit report and froze it, changed every password, deleted Daniel's shared access to my cloud drive, my calendar, my location sharing. The ATM camera in the corner caught my reflection as I stood to leave. White blouse wrinkled and damp, hair in a messy ponytail, eyes that looked like they'd finally woken up after years of sleep. I drove home in silence. Daniel was asleep when I slipped back inside, or pretending to be. The house was dark and quiet. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching the rise and fall of his chest, and felt nothing. No love, no anger, just a strange, hollow distance. In the laundry hamper, half hidden beneath his shirt, I found Brooke's silk scarf, the one I'd given her last Christmas, pale blue with silver threads. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and slid it into a plastic zip bag. Evidence. Then I carried it to the kitchen, tucked it into the back of the pantry behind the flour and sugar, and whispered to the dark. 30 days. I will not drown again. Dawn broke pale and cold over the bay. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, waiting. At 6:32, the notification lit up my screen. Wire transfer received. $90,000. I exhaled. New oxygen flooded my lungs. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The pier smelled like salt and diesel and wet rope. I stood at the edge, takeout coffee steaming in my hands, watching Jonah Reyes weld a cracked rail on his salvage boat. Sparks flew in bright orange arcs, hissing when they hit the water below. The boat was small, maybe 30 feet, painted a faded blue with the name Second Wind stenciled on the hull in peeling white letters. Jonah worked alone, hunched over the metal, his welding mask flipped down, muttering under his breath about canceled gigs and insurance companies that never paid on time. I'd known Jonah peripherally for years. He ran weekend recoveries, small jobs nobody else wanted, dropped anchors, lost fishing gear, the occasional phone that slipped through dock planks. My grandmother used to tell stories about the harbor, about the things people lost and the things they paid to get back. Standing there, watching him work, I remembered those stories, and I saw an opportunity. When he finally flipped up his mask and noticed me, I was already pulling out my phone. "Got a minute?" I asked. He squinted at me, wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. "Depends. You here to hire me or sell me something?" "Hire. Sort of." I set my coffee down on a piling and pulled up the notes I drafted at 3 in the morning. "I want to propose a partnership. Micro-scale. Weekend recoveries. Phones. Heirlooms. Small marina claims. Things people lose that insurance won't cover, but they'll pay cash to get back. I front $25,000 for gear upgrades and local marketing. You handle the diving and logistics. I take 30% of the weekend jobs. Quiet operation. No headlines." Jonah stared at me for a long moment, then set down his welding torch.
25,000.
"Yes. Where'd you get that kind of money?" "Does it matter?" He studied me, eyes narrowing. "Why the secrecy?" I met his gaze.
No one can know. That's the condition. If anyone finds out where the money came from, I lose it.
His expression shifted. Understanding flickered across his face, the kind that came from living on the margins long enough to recognize when someone else was doing the same. He nodded once. "Deal." We shook hands. His grip was calloused and firm. The first job came 3 days later. A bride whose heirloom pendant had slipped off during her rehearsal dinner at the Marina restaurant. She was crying when she called. Desperate. Jonah dove at dawn, found it wedged between two dock pilings, and handed it back to her in a waterproof case. She filmed the whole thing, tears streaming down her face, and posted it online. The video went local viral. By the end of the week, we had 6 more calls. The second job was a CEO whose drone had crashed into the bay during a real estate shoot. The footage was unbacked, irreplaceable. Jonah recovered it in under an hour. 2 days later, an envelope showed up at the Marina office. No return address, $5,000 in cash, and a note that said thank you. The third job came during a storm. A sailboat broke loose from its mooring and capsized near the breakwater. The owners were frantic, pacing the dock in the rain, shouting over the wind. I stepped in with a calm I hadn't felt in years, running through a checklist like I was back in the ambulance. Assess the damage, prioritize the recovery, coordinate with the harbor patrol. Jonah worked in the water while I managed the chaos on land. By the time the storm passed, the boat was secured, and the owners handed us a finder's fee that covered our expenses for the month. I felt alive again, useful, in control. At home, Daniel grew syrupy sweet. He brought flowers, cooked dinner, asked about my day with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I played small, answered in vague pleasantries, and watched him. At night, I went through his calendar, cross-referencing it with credit card receipts I'd quietly pulled from our shared account. Hotel charges, restaurant bills. Every Thursday evening for the past 6 months, I kept copies of everything in a plain bakery box I'd labeled recipes, tucked behind the stand mixer in the kitchen. Brooke checked in constantly. Lunch invitations, coffee dates, long texts asking if I was okay. I smiled and replied with emojis and reassurances, all while cataloging every inconsistency. She mentioned a concert Daniel had supposedly attended alone. I found 2 tickets charged to his card. She asked if I'd noticed. He seemed stressed. I said no and filed the conversation away. The inheritance sat mostly untouched. $25,000 to Jonah. Another 2 for gear and permits. The rest stayed in the account under my maiden name, a safety net I refused to touch unless absolutely necessary. Then the rumor surfaced. A fisherman named Hector, grizzled and sun-worn, mentioned it over coffee at the marina one morning. An insured art crate had fallen from a chartered jet tender 3 years ago. Something about a private collector moving pieces offshore to avoid taxes. The crate went into the bay during a transfer, and the whole thing was quietly hushed to avoid publicity and insurance fraud investigations. Hector still had the approximate coordinates, scribbled on a napkin by a drunken crewman who'd worked the charter. Most people thought it was a myth, harbor legend. But when I mentioned it to Jonah later that afternoon, his eyes changed. He didn't say anything, just looked out at the water with an expression I couldn't quite read. Maybe not, that look said. At home that evening, Daniel cornered me in the kitchen. Have you seen my spare keys? He asked, tone light but eyes hard. No. Did you check your jacket? I checked everywhere. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. We should talk about our savings. I've been thinking we need to consolidate accounts. Make things simpler. My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice even. Sure, we can talk about it this weekend. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Later that night, Brooke texted, Girls' night this Friday? There's a new lounge on Harborview. You'll love it. I looked up the address. It was 2 blocks from Daniel's office. The same lounge that had appeared on his credit card statement 4 times in the past 2 months. I texted back. Another time. Swamped with work. She replied with a sad face emoji and a heart. I set my phone down and stared at the bakery box on the counter. Evidence, timeline, proof. 30 days wasn't over yet, but I was ready. The next morning, Jonah called. His voice was tight with controlled excitement. I tested the sonar in that grid Hector mentioned. Got a ping. Rock? I asked. No. A pause. Something boxy. Man-made. About the right size. I closed my eyes and felt the shift. The current pulling us towards something bigger than weekend recoveries and lost pendants. When do we go? I asked. Tonight, he said. Low tide. No moon. No witnesses. I hung up and looked at the bay outside my window. Dark water. Endless secrets. I wasn't drowning anymore. I was diving. If this story hooked you, imagine how many others are scrolling past right now who need to see what happens next. The loan document was sitting on the printer when I came downstairs. White paper. Black ink. My signature at the bottom. Pledging our condo as collateral for a $70,000 personal loan I'd never heard of. I picked it up with hands that had gone numb. The notary stamp was clear. Official. Dated 2 weeks ago. The name beneath it made my blood run ice cold. Rebecca Larkin, Brooke's cousin. I stood there in the empty house, document trembling in my grip, and felt the last piece of denial shatter. This wasn't just an affair. This was theft, fraud, a systematic dismantling of everything I'd built. When Daniel came home that evening, I was waiting at the kitchen table, the document laid out in front of me like evidence at trial. He saw it immediately. His expression flickered, just for a second, before smoothing into something calm and practiced. We need to talk about this, I said. He set down his briefcase. I was going to tell you. Tell me what? That you forged my signature? That you used our home as collateral without my knowledge or consent? His jaw tightened. Then he leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. Don't act innocent, Naomi! You think I don't know what you've been doing? Sneaking around. Hiding money. You've been embezzling from our marriage. The accusation landed like a slap. I almost laughed. Embezzling. Where's the money coming from? The marina jobs? The late nights? His voice rose. I want passwords. Bank accounts. Everything. Right now. Miriam's voice echoed in my head. Tell no one. I stood slowly, folding the document and sliding it into my bag. I'll get a lawyer. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist. You're not going anywhere until we settle this. I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. My voice came out flat and cold. Let go. He did. Slowly. I walked out of the house without another word. The text from Brooke came an hour later while I sat in my car outside the marina, hands still shaking. Hey, how's Jonah's boat project going? Heard you two have been spending a lot of time together. I stared at the message. I'd never mentioned Jonah to her. Not once. My stomach dropped. I pulled up my phone settings and found it. Location sharing. Still active. I'd turned it on years ago, during a girls' trip, and never turned it off. Brooke had been tracking me for weeks, maybe months, feeding everything back to Daniel. I disabled it immediately, then sat in the dark, piecing it together. The casual check-ins. The questions about my schedule. The inside jokes she'd started using differently, with an edge I hadn't noticed until now. Remember when you said you'd never trust a man in a suit? Guess things change. She'd been taunting me. I drove home in silence, waited until Daniel was asleep, then went to his laptop in the study. The password was the same as always. He'd never changed it. Overconfident, sloppy. I opened his email and found the thread. Messages between him and Brooke. Plans. Logistics. A scan of my signature, lifted from an old tax document, photoshopped onto the loan paperwork. I forwarded the entire thread to my cloud account, then composed a message flagged directly to Miriam with a subject line that read urgent and a single sentence in the body. Evidence of forged signatures attached. Please secure. I hit send and closed the laptop. The next morning, Jonah and I filed a good faith notice with the harbor master. A salvage claim on an unidentified container, approximate coordinates provided, time-stamped and witnessed by the harbor office. We kept the language vague, careful, legal. Then we spent the afternoon assembling lift bags, checking tarps, and confirming our private night window. Low tide, no moon, minimal traffic. Jonah worked in silence, methodical and focused. I ran through checklists, laminated cards clipped to a binder, each step mapped out in detail. Inflate bags, secure lines, monitor sonar, document everything. We were ready. That evening, Miriam called. Her voice was brisk and businesslike. The 30-day period ends at midnight tomorrow. If you've kept the clause intact, a sealed envelope will be delivered to you the following morning. Content unknown, per your grandmother's instructions. I kept it, I said. Good. A pause. I received your message. I've forwarded the evidence to my colleague in family law. We'll discuss next steps after the clause expires. I thanked her and hung up. At home, Daniel was waiting in the living room. No pretense this time. No flowers or soft smiles. Just cold, efficient calculation. Sit down, he said. I stayed standing. He slid a document across the coffee table. Marital Finance Consolidation Agreement. All accounts merged. Joint access. Joint control. Sign it, he said. Or I liquidate everything. The condo. The cars. Your grandmother's jewelry. All of it. I'll tie it up in legal battles for years. You'll have nothing. I looked at him. Really looked. At the man I'd married. The man I'd trusted. The man who'd spent months systematically betraying me. And I realized something. I wasn't afraid. Not of him. Not of losing the house or the jewelry or any of it. I picked up the document, tore it in half, and dropped it on the floor. Try it, I said. His face went white with rage, but I was already walking out the door. Jonah called 20 minutes later. Sonar confirmed it. The crate's there. We can lift it in one tide. When? Tonight. Midnight. I grabbed my gear and drove to the marina. The night was black and still, water flat as glass. Jonah had the second wind idling at the dock, lift bags already loaded, tarps secured. I climbed aboard and we pushed off into the dark. We were halfway to the coordinates when I saw them. Headlights sweeping the dock behind us. 2 sets. Then 3. A larger boat. Commercial grade. Engines rumbling to life. We've got company, I said quietly. Jonah followed my gaze and cursed under his breath. Rival crew. Someone tipped them off. I didn't have to guess who. The boats started moving toward us, cutting across the bay. Fast. Deliberate. Jonah looked at me, jaw set. We can still do this. But it's going to get messy. I pulled on my gloves and checked the lift lines. Then, let's make it count. The race was on. You've come this far, but if you scroll away now, you'll never know whether she pulls it off or loses everything in the dark. The water rolled black-green beneath us, thick and cold. Floodlights from the second wind lanced the surface, cutting through the dark in bright beams that made the silt glow like fog. I wore my white blouse under a dry suit top, the fabric clinging to my skin as I leaned over the rail, gloved hands gripping the rope. Below, Jonah worked in the water, bubbles streaming upward in silvery chains as he clipped lift bags to the buried crate. The rival crew's boat idled 50 yards out, engines rumbling, watching, waiting. Jonah surfaced, spitting his regulator, and gave me the signal. Ready. I pulled the inflation cord. Air hissed into the bags, loud and urgent. The rope went taut, groaning under the strain. Silt ghosted upward in dark clouds, swirling through the floodlights. The crate shifted, moved, started to rise. My heart hammered. My hands shook, not from fear, but from focus. Every nerve locked on the lines, and the slow, agonizing ascent of something that had been lost for 3 years. The rival boat's engines revved. They started moving toward us. Jonah climbed aboard, water streaming from his suit, and grabbed the winch controls. They're coming! Let them, I said. By the time the crate broke the surface, the rival crew was already pulling alongside. Daniel stood on their deck, arms crossed. Brooke beside him with her phone out, recording. A third man I didn't recognize stepped forward, older, weathered, clearly the captain. That's our salvage, he called across the water. We've been tracking this site for weeks. Back off, or we'll file a claim. I didn't move, didn't shout. I reached into my waterproof bag and pulled out the folded document, holding it up so the floodlights caught the harbor master's stamp. Filed salvage claim, I said calmly. Time-stamped 20 hours ago, witnessed and notarized. You're welcome to contest it in court, but right now, this recovery is ours.
The captain hesitated. Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharp.
She's lying. She stole money from our joint account to fund this. It's fraud. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and hit play. Daniel's voice filled the night air, tinny but clear through the speaker. We need the equity. Use Rebecca to notarize it. Naomi won't notice until it's done. Then Brooke's voice. What if she checks? She won't. She trusts me. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. The rival captain looked at Daniel, then at me, his jaw tightened. We're out. He turned the boat around without another word. No one wanted legal heat. Not over something like this. Daniel's face went white. Brooke lowered her phone. I turned back to Jonah.
Let's finish this!
The winch creaked as we guided the crate onto the deck. Water sheeted off the wood, ancient and warped, but intact. Jonah secured it with tarps while I called the harbor master. 10 minutes later, his boat arrived with a marine conservator on board, a woman named Dr. Ellison who specialized in underwater recoveries. The rival crew had started filming from a distance. I smiled. Documentation was good. It established chain of custody, proof of priority. Dr. Ellison pulled back the tarps and carefully pried open the crate. Inside, wrapped in deteriorating canvas, were sculptures, mid-century bronzes, abstract figures, smooth and heavy, each one marked with a small engraved plaque. She photographed everything, cataloging each piece, while the harbor master took notes. These were reported missing 3 years ago, Doctor, Ellison said quietly. Privately insured. Written off by a gallery in San Francisco after a transport incident. They'll want them back. What's the finder's fee? I asked. She did the math on her tablet, cross-referencing insurance records and maritime salvage law. Conservatively, given the insured value and the circumstances, you're looking at a finder's fee and salvage award in the range of $2.4 million. The number hung in the air. Jonah exhaled slowly beside me. I felt the weight of it settle. Not as relief, but as validation. We'd earned this. Every step, every risk. Behind us, engines roared. I turned and saw 2 police boats cutting across the bay, lights flashing. Miriam stood on the deck of the lead vessel, her expression calm and unreadable. Beside her were 2 officers in uniform. They boarded the rival crew's boat first. Daniel stepped back, hands raised, already talking, but the officers weren't listening. One of them pulled out handcuffs. Miriam crossed to the second wind, stepping carefully over the rail. She handed me a folder without preamble. Your evidence was sufficient, she said. Daniel Hale is being arrested for attempted fraud and coercion. Brooke Larkin for conspiracy to commit fraud and notary fraud. Rebecca Larkin is cooperating with authorities in exchange for reduced charges. I watched from the deck as they cuffed Daniel, read him his rights, and led him onto the police boat. Brooke followed, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked at me once. I didn't look away. I never raised my voice. I didn't have to. I'd raised my receipts instead. Dawn broke soft and pink over the water. The crate sat secured on the dock, covered and guarded, while Jonah and I signed the final paperwork in the harbor master's office. We formalized the partnership that morning. Baylight salvage and recovery. 50-50 split, equal footing. I kept my job at the cafe 3 days a week. I loved the rhythm of it, the quiet mornings, the regulars who knew my name. With the salvage award, I funded 2 scholarships in my grandmother's name for women pursuing maritime trades. I bought a weatherproof storage facility by the marina for our gear. The rest went into savings, untouchable, mine. A week later, I stood on the pier where it all began. The same spot where I'd stood barefoot and shaking, betrayed and lost. Now I wore my white blouse, crisp and clean, tucked into dark jeans. My hair lifted in the sea breeze. The crane swung the last piece of equipment into place, and I watched the water glitter in the early light. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. We heard you can find what's lost. I smiled and typed back 2 words. I can. The water stretched out before me, endless and full of secrets. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I wasn't drowning. I was diving. And I was just getting started. If her story inspired you but you keep it to yourself, how many others will keep scrolling without ever knowing they could rise too?